Stone does not forget. It remembers every cut, every angle, every impossible decision made by human hands long before recorded history began. Around the world there are massive structures, so precise they seem to defy the limits of ancient ingenuity. Stones weighing hundreds of tons, carved with a precision that rivals modern machinery. The balance and engineering appeared disturbingly sophisticated for their time. These are not myths. They are not legends. They still stand. What makes them truly unsettling is not their size, but their timing. According to everything we'd been taught, the people who built them shouldn't have been capable of such feats. Yet the evidence is there, silent, steadfast, and impossible to ignore. On this journey, we will explore structures that challenge the official narrative of human progress and force us to ask a disturbing question. What if our ancestors knew far more than we give them credit for? If you enjoy documentaries that question accepted history and explore the forgotten aspects of our past, please support the channel by liking the video and subscribing. This helps keep these stories alive. Now let's begin. Rising from the barren immensity of Bolivia's Altiplano, at an elevation of more than 12,500 feet above sea level, lies a site that feels less like a conventional ruin and more like the exposed remains of a dismantled industrial system. This is Tiwanaku, one of the most enigmatic archaeological complexes in the ancient world. At its ceremonial heart once stood the Ponce monolith, an imposing figure over 11 feet tall, carved from deep red sandstone. The statue stands upright and motionless, its expression fixed, as though silently guarding knowledge from a distant age. At first glance, it resembles a familiar ritual idol, yet closer inspection reveals something far more unsettling. Its surface is covered in an intricate grid of geometric patterns, precise, repetitive, and highly organized, so dense and orderly that comparisons to modern circuit boards or integrated systems are difficult to ignore. In its hands, the figure holds two objects known as keros, traditionally interpreted as ceremonial drinking vessels. However, their sharply defined edges, elongated handles, and symmetrical forms appear less ornamental than functional. To some observers, they resemble specialized instruments rather than ritual cups, raising questions about whether their symbolism has been fully understood. The challenges facing the builders of Tiwanaku begin with the environment itself. At this altitude, oxygen levels are significantly reduced, physical endurance is limited, and sustained heavy labor becomes extraordinarily difficult. Yet the sandstone used for the Ponce monolith does not originate at the site. Geological analysis confirms that the nearest known quarries lie many miles away across uneven, mountainous terrain, with no evidence of wheeled transport or large draft animals. Moving a multi-ton sandstone monolith through this landscape would have required not only immense coordination, but also careful engineering. Sandstone fractures easily under uneven stress, making dragging or rolling it over rough ground extremely risky. The task demanded not brute force alone, but a sophisticated understanding of load management and material integrity. Nearby stands the Pumapunku complex, where Tiwanaku's engineering precision becomes even more striking. Scattered across the platform are the famous H-shaped blocks, carved from sandstone and andesite. These blocks display astonishing accuracy, perfectly straight channels, internal right angles, uniform dimensions, and drill holes spaced with mathematical consistency. Many were designed to interlock, forming modular architectural units. Several blocks feature grooves intended to hold metal clamps into which molten copper-based alloys were poured to bind stones together.
This technique is archaeologically confirmed and indicates advanced planning and metallurgical knowledge. Andesite, however, is an exceptionally hard volcanic stone, far harder than copper tools alone would comfortably shape. When measured with modern instruments, many cuts approach angular precision within fractions of a degree. Creating clean internal right angles in such material is extremely difficult without sustained abrasion, controlled pressure, and repeatable techniques. How this level of consistency was achieved remains a subject of serious debate, though most archaeologists attribute it to long-term skill refinement using stone tools, abrasives, and immense labor investment. Mainstream archaeology dates Tiwanaku's primary occupation between 500 and 1000 AD, based on radiocarbon analysis, ceramic styles, and stratigraphy. However, this timeline has been challenged historically, most notably by early 20th century researcher Arthur Posnansky.
Poznansky argued that the colossal temple functioned as a precise solar observatory. Based on perceived misalignments between architectural features and current solstice positions, he proposed that the complex was originally aligned around 15,000 BC, deep in the last ice age. Modern scholars, however, have demonstrated that Poznansky's measurements were flawed, that the temple walls were reconstructed in the 20th century, and that the astronomical claims do not withstand rigorous analysis. While his conclusions are no longer accepted, they contributed to Tiwanaku's reputation as a site that challenges conventional assumptions and invites speculation about lost knowledge. Alternative theories have also emerged regarding construction methods. Some researchers have proposed that the stones were not carved traditionally, but shaped using early geopolymer techniques, a hypothesis suggesting that crushed stone was mixed with mineral binders and poured into molds. This idea remains speculative and unproven, but it attempts to explain the uniformity of certain blocks and the crispness of fine details. Local oral traditions add another layer of mystery, describing a time when stone could be softened and shaped as if it were clay, using divine fire or sacred tools. While mythological in nature, some observers point to vitrified or glass-like surfaces at certain joints as evidence of exposure to intense heat, though mainstream geology attributes these features to weathering or mineral processes. Beyond monumental architecture, Tiwanaku reveals an equally impressive mastery of landscape engineering. The site was once connected to the shores of Lake Titicaca, which extended closer to the city in antiquity. Remains of stone docks and canal systems suggest that Tiwanaku functioned as a high-altitude maritime hub, adapted to an environment vastly different from today's arid plain. The civilization also developed raised field agriculture, an ingenious system of elevated planting platforms surrounded by water channels. These fields regulated temperature, protected crops from frost, and dramatically increased yields in one of the world's harshest farming environments. This was not a society merely surviving the Altiplano, it was actively reshaping it. The significance of the Ponce monolith lies not only in its craftsmanship, but in what it symbolizes. The figure's patterned surface and enigmatic tools suggest a culture deeply concerned with order, measurement, and transformation. Whether it represents a deity, a priest, or an elite specialist remains unknown. In many ancient traditions, civilizing figures are remembered as teachers, those who brought architecture, astronomy, agriculture, and law to humanity. Standing before the monolith, one is left with the haunting impression that this statue may not depict a god at all, but rather the architects of Tiwanaku themselves, immortalized in stone as guardians of knowledge from a world that has long since vanished. Anchored in the low forested plains of northwestern Cambodia, where seasonal monsoon rains alternately flood and retreat from the land, Angkor Wat rises not as an isolated monument, but as the most visible expression of an immense engineered landscape. Its towers and galleries represent only a single node within a vast system of canals, reservoirs, embankments, roads, and temples that once sustained one of the largest pre-modern urban complexes on Earth. Here, monument and environment are inseparable, bound together by water, labor, and long-term planning. From a distance, the temple's 5 lotus-shaped towers form a measured and symmetrical silhouette against the sky, their balance suggesting permanence and calm. Yet beneath this apparent stillness lies a city defined by movement. Angkor's survival depended on the continuous regulation of water across a flat, flood-prone terrain, vulnerable to both drought and inundation. Constructed in the early 12th century during the reign of King Suryavarman II, Angkor Wat is conventionally understood as a state temple dedicated to the Hindu god Vishnu. Its extensive bas-reliefs narrate cosmological epics, royal processions, and mythic battles with remarkable continuity, unfolding across hundreds of meters of sandstone walls. The precision of these carvings, executed in tightly fitted sandstone blocks without mortar, reflects an artistic and technical tradition already refined through centuries of Khmer experimentation by the time Angkor Wat reached its final form. Yet the monument's grandeur alone does not convey the full scale of the civilization that produced it. Angkor was not merely a ceremonial center. It was the core of an urban system extending across hundreds of square kilometers, supporting a population measured in the hundreds of thousands through agricultural intensification and hydraulic control. Only in recent decades has the true extent of this system become fully visible. Remote sensing technologies, including aerial photography and LiDAR, have revealed an immense and carefully organized grid beneath forest canopy and rice fields. Canals, bere reservoirs, spillways, and embankments reshaped the terrain to capture monsoon rains, store excess water, and redistribute it during the dry season. This hydraulic network was not a single master plan imposed at once, but a layered system continuously modified, repaired, and expanded over generations, indicating institutional continuity and accumulated environmental knowledge rather than short-term ambition. Angkor Wat itself occupies a strategic position within this network, encircled by a vast moat that functions symbolically as the cosmic ocean surrounding Mount Meru, while also stabilizing groundwater levels and protecting the temple's foundations from seasonal fluctuations. The temple's westward orientation, unusual within the Angkorian canon, has prompted debate regarding funerary symbolism, solar alignments, and ritual function. Its central axis aligns with key astronomical phenomena, reinforcing the integration of cosmology, kingship, and architecture. Within the temple's galleries, bas-reliefs unfold in carefully sequenced panels designed to be read through movement. Ascending levels draw the body upward through progressively restricted spaces, translating cosmological hierarchy into physical experience. The stones themselves record a quieter narrative of organization and labor. Quarried from distant sources, transported along waterways, shaped to standardized dimensions, and assembled with remarkable consistency, point to centralized coordination and specialized craft communities operating at scale.
Inscriptions name donors, officials, and religious foundations, offering glimpses into ritual life and patronage. Yet they reveal little about the administrative systems or engineering principles that sustained Angkor's hydraulic infrastructure across centuries. By the 13th and 14th centuries, signs of strain began to emerge. Canals silted, reservoirs failed, and climatic instability intensified, marked by extended droughts followed by destructive floods. Paleo-environmental evidence suggests that the very system that once ensured resilience became increasingly difficult to manage as its complexity outpaced adaptability. These environmental pressures coincided with political shifts, religious transformation from Hinduism to Buddhism, and changing regional dynamics. Together, They contributed to a gradual decentralization of Angkor as an urban core. Decline, however, did not mean abandonment. Temples continued to be used. Populations persisted in reduced form. Angkor Wat itself was never fully deserted, its continuous occupation contributing to its preservation, even as surrounding structures were reclaimed by forest. The idea of a lost civilization arises here not from sudden collapse, but from disparity between what remains visible and what has faded from collective memory. The Khmer builders did not invent their techniques in isolation. They drew upon earlier regional traditions of water management, monumentality, and cosmological mapping, refining them over generations into a highly integrated system. What feels enigmatic today is not the existence of such knowledge, but the disappearance of the institutional memory required to sustain it. Angkor Wat stands as a focal point where architecture, environment, and ideology briefly aligned at extraordinary scale, producing a landscape that functioned simultaneously as city, temple, and cosmogram. The notion of a lost civilization need not invoke unknown peoples or forgotten technologies, but rather the erosion of continuity, the quiet loss of practices that depended on constant coordination and maintenance. As roots prise apart sandstone blocks and water levels rise and fall with the seasons, Angkor Wat remains legible yet incomplete. Its reliefs continue to tell their stories, even as the broader narrative of how such a system was sustained recedes into silence. The temple does not contradict history, it deepens it, reminding us that the most complex human achievements are often systemic rather than singular. When those systems falter, what endures can feel strangely disproportionate to what once existed. In that imbalance, Angkor Wat suggests that civilizations are rarely lost all at once. They thin gradually, their deepest knowledge dissolving quietly, even as their most enduring stones remain, inviting reflection rather than resolution.
Rising in isolation on the eastern edge of the island of Tonga Tapu in the Kingdom of Tonga stands a monument that unsettles nearly every assumption about the technological capabilities of ancient Pacific societies. Known as Ha'omonga a Maui, often translated as the Burden of Maui, this structure is a monumental trilithon formed from 3 massive slabs of coral limestone. 2 vertical uprights support a horizontal lintel, which is not merely placed on top, but securely locked into position through carefully carved mortise and tenon joints. The monument stands roughly 5 meters, about 17 feet high, and its combined mass is estimated in the tens of tons, with individual stones weighing many tons each. It is frequently called the Stonehenge of the Pacific, not because of superficial resemblance, but because it represents a level of megalithic planning and execution that appears profoundly unexpected on a remote coral island. For centuries, the dominant building traditions of Tonga relied on timber, palm fronds, and thatch, materials well suited to a tropical maritime environment. Stone architecture of this scale and precision stands in stark contrast to that tradition. According to conventional archaeological chronology, the Ha'omonga a Maui was constructed around 1200 CE during the reign of Tui Tonga Tuitatui, one of the sacred rulers of the Tui Tonga Empire. This period marked the height of Tongan power. Far from being isolated, Tonga presided over a vast maritime network that extended across much of western Polynesia, including Samoa, Fiji, Uvea, Wallis Island, and beyond. The Tui Tonga kings ruled through a rigid hierarchy supported by tribute, navigation expertise, and highly organized labor. Yet Tongan oral tradition preserves a very different explanation for the monument's origins. According to legend, the stones were not quarried on Tonga Tapu at all, but were carried across the sea from Uvea, Wallis Island, by the demigod Maui, who transported them on his shoulders in a single night. While modern archaeology dismisses the divine aspect of the story, the legend encodes a striking logistical implication that the stones were believed to have traveled hundreds of kilometers across open ocean. This implication exposes a construction paradox that remains unresolved. Geologically, Tonga Tapu is a low-lying coral limestone island almost entirely flat and lacking exposed bedrock quarries inland. If the stones were sourced locally, as most scholars suggest, they would have been cut from the coastal reef limestone some distance from the final site. Even this scenario presents enormous technical challenges. Transporting multi-ton stone blocks across soft tropical ground is an engineering nightmare. Tonga Tapu's lacks tall, straight hardwood trees found in places like Europe or the Near East, which were traditionally used to manufacture heavy-duty rollers. The island's soil, largely composed of sand, coral debris, and soft volcanic sediments, would collapse under concentrated loads. Any wooden rollers would be driven into the earth, immobilizing the stone almost immediately. What is often overshadowed by the monument's sheer size is its precision engineering. The lintel is not balanced precariously on the uprights. Instead, it's recessed into deep sockets carved into their tops. This design prevents lateral movement and protects the structure from seismic activity and the powerful cyclones that regularly strike the region. Mortise and tenon joinery is a technique typically associated with advanced timber architecture or with highly developed stone cultures such as those of ancient Egypt or Neolithic Europe. Executing this method in coral limestone, a brittle material prone to fracturing under uneven stress, required exceptional planning and control. This level of stone craftsmanship directly contradicts outdated notions of Pacific societies as technologically simple.
A crucial clue to the monument's purpose lies in its astronomical alignment. In 1967, King Taufa'ahau Tupou IV proposed that Ha-Monga Amau functioned not merely as a ceremonial gateway, but as a solar observatory. Subsequent studies confirmed that markings on the lintel align with the sunrise during the summer and winter solstices. This alignment reveals a sophisticated understanding of solar cycles and celestial measurement. For a maritime empire, such knowledge was not symbolic, it was essential. Solstitial observations allowed navigators to recalibrate star paths and maintain accuracy during long-distance voyages across thousands of kilometers of open ocean. Archaeologically, Ha-Monga Amau is part of a broader ceremonial landscape known as Heketa, once the political and spiritual heart of the Tui Tonga state. Nearby stands a massive stone throne, the Esi Maka Fakinanga, traditionally used by the king. Oral accounts describe the ruler seated with his back against the stone, protected from attack, while attendants enforced social distance with long staffs. The Tui Tonga system was an absolute monarchy, supported by meticulously organized labor obligations. Constructing Ha-Monga Amau would have required the coordinated effort of hundreds, possibly thousands of workers. Quarrying, transporting, lifting, and precisely fitting the stones likely involved earthen ramps, leverage systems, and heavy ropes braided from coconut fiber, a material of remarkable tensile strength. Despite the prevailing local quarry theory, the legend of Uea endures because it reflects a deeper truth about Tongan culture, mastery of the sea. If the stones were transported even partially by water, it would imply that Tongan kalia and other ocean-going vessels were capable of carrying loads that challenge modern assumptions about wooden ship displacement. A single stone weighing many tons would require a barge-like platform or a multi-hulled vessel of exceptional stability. No such craft has survived archaeologically, but the monument itself suggests that Polynesian maritime engineering has been systematically underestimated.
Excavations around Heketa have revealed stone-paved pathways, foundations, and imported materials. Pottery fragments of the Lapita-descended traditions and stone tools made from basalt, a material not found on Tongatapu, confirm long-distance trade with volcanic islands such as Samoa and Fiji. This places the builders firmly within a pan-Pacific exchange network centuries before European contact. The contradiction at the heart of Ha'amonga Amau mirrors those seen at Stonehenge or Tiwanaku, the apparent mismatch between available tools and achieved results. Officially, the Tongans of this period were transitioning between late stone and timber technologies, yet they produced a monument governed by principles of structural engineering, astronomy, and permanence. Why invest such immense energy in stone when timber was abundant and sufficient for daily needs? The answer lies in permanence and power. Stone anchored the empire to both earth and sky, declaring authority not just to subjects, but to time itself. When maritime skill, social organization, and astronomical precision are considered together, the image of the isolated islander collapses entirely. Ha'amonga Amau stands as physical proof that the 13th century Tongan Empire was a sophisticated, technologically capable civilization, one that understood how to command stone as confidently as it ruled the sea. It suggests that Polynesian pre-contact history is missing a crucial chapter, one in which Polynesian kings were not merely navigators of oceans, but engineers of megaliths, shaping both landscape and legend with equal mastery.
On a small, isolated triangle of volcanic land in the southeastern Pacific, thousands of kilometers from any continental shoreline, the moai of Rapa Nui stand in quiet ranks and fall in clusters. Their elongated faces turn inward toward the island rather than outward to the sea, their presence unmistakable yet restrained, as if the landscape itself has learned to accommodate their watchful stillness. They do not dominate their surroundings so much as inhabit them, woven into the terrain through repetition, weathering, and time. At first glance, the statues appear deceptively simple, massive human forms carved from volcanic stone, lacking limbs, repeating a limited range of proportions and expressions. Yet prolonged attention reveals that they resist simplification. Subtle variations in posture, facial structure, scale, and finish suggest deliberate choices rather than formulaic production. Their relationship to the land unfolds gradually, revealing an intentional dialogue between sculpture, territory, and social memory rather than an immediately legible spectacle. Rapa Nui's isolation is among the most extreme on Earth, even within the vast navigational world of Polynesia. This remoteness frames much of the island's historical intrigue. Every material resource, cultural practice, and inherited idea arrived by canoe and then evolved for centuries without external reinforcement. Archaeological evidence places initial settlement around the 12th to early 13th century CE, part of the broader eastward expansion of Polynesian voyagers. Within a relatively short span of time, the carving and erection of moai began, eventually producing nearly 1,000 statues of varying size, some exceeding 10 meters in height and weighing more than 70 metric tons. The primary quarry at Rano Raraku preserves this process in arrested motion. Carved directly from volcanic tuff rather than basalt, unfinished moai remain embedded in the quarry slopes, some partially freed, others abandoned mid-formation. Their presence suggests that production was once continuous and systematic, not episodic. Tool marks indicate the use of stone adzes fashioned from basalt, and experimental archaeology has demonstrated that carving techniques were effective, if labor-intensive, reinforcing the conclusion that this was a specialized and well-established craft. Once completed, the statues were transported across the island to ceremonial platforms known as ahu, most often positioned along the coast.
There, the moai were raised upright and oriented inland, overlooking former villages, gardens, and agricultural zones. How these massive figures were moved has been debated for decades. Proposed methods include sledges, rollers, lubricated tracks, and controlled walking using ropes. While no single model has achieved universal acceptance, multiple experiments have demonstrated that transport was feasible with coordinated human effort and planning. What remains striking is not the possibility of movement, but the consistency with which it was achieved, implying a shared body of technical knowledge transmitted across generations. Ahu themselves are carefully engineered structures, constructed with fitted stonework and often incorporating burial chambers and cremation platforms. These features place the moai within a broader framework of ancestor veneration rather than isolated monumentality. Ethnographic accounts recorded after European contact describe the statues as embodiments of ariki, powerful ancestors whose mana, or spiritual force, sustained social and ecological balance. This interpretation aligns with the statue's inward-facing orientation and their placement overlooking inhabited land. Some moai were topped with pukao, cylindrical red scoria elements sourced from a separate quarry, adding further complexity to transport, symbolism, and installation. The island's ecology tells a parallel story of transformation. Paleo-environmental evidence indicates that Rapa Nui was once forested with large palms, trees that gradually disappeared over time. Earlier interpretations framed this deforestation as evidence of ecological collapse driven by overexploitation linked to statue construction. More recent research complicates this narrative, pointing to multiple contributing factors, including the introduction of Polynesian rats, climate variability, and adaptive shifts in subsistence strategies. Intensive lithic mulching agriculture allowed continued food production even in altered environmental conditions, suggesting resilience and reorganization rather than sudden collapse. The cessation of moai erection appears to have been gradual. Many statues were later toppled, likely during periods of internal conflict intensified by external pressures following European contact, including disease, violence, and enslavement. By the time outsiders arrived in the 18th century, the cultural system that had sustained the moai tradition was already under strain, and much of its symbolic coherence had been disrupted or transformed. This rupture has encouraged speculation about vanished knowledge or forgotten origins, yet the archaeological record firmly situates the moai within known Polynesian cultural trajectories. Their significance lies not in defying explanation, but in representing an extreme elaboration of ancestor veneration under conditions of profound isolation. The sense of a lost civilization arises not from mysterious technology, but from the thinning of continuity, from the unraveling of an integrated system of belief, labor, and landscape management that left few opportunities for transmission once disrupted. The moai are not relics of an unknown people, but of a known society whose internal logic is only partially recoverable. Their faces, standardized yet subtly individualized, reflect a balance between collective identity and lineage. Their distribution across the island maps former social territories now invisible. As erosion softens their features and lichen spreads across their surfaces, the statues remain legible but increasingly abstract, their original immediacy replaced by quiet endurance. They do not proclaim catastrophe or lost advancement. They simply persist, witnesses to a period when a small population invested immense effort in making ancestry visible and enduring in stone. In this persistence lies the deeper significance that complexity can arise, flourish, and diminish without leaving clear explanatory records. What survives is grounded firmly in culture, yet suspended beyond lived memory. Facing inward toward an island once densely inhabited and now sparsely populated, the Moai suggest that what is truly lost is not the people themselves, but the unbroken chain of meaning that once animated stone, land, and community as a single coherent whole.
Stonehenge stands on a windswept chalk plain in southern Britain, where the land rolls gently and the sky feels unusually expansive. There are no enclosing mountains, no natural barriers that draw the eye inward. Instead, the monument occupies an open horizon exposed to wind, light, and seasonal change. Its presence is restrained rather than overwhelming. The stones do not rise high enough to dominate the landscape, nor are they numerous enough to suggest excess, yet once encountered, they are impossible to ignore. This apparent simplicity conceals a long and complex history. Stonehenge was not conceived as a single act of construction, but as a project that unfolded over more than 1,000 years, beginning around 3000 BCE and continuing well into the second millennium BCE. What appears today as a fixed arrangement of stones was once a continuously evolving site, reshaped through distinct phases that included earthworks, timber structures, early stone settings, and eventually the monumental Sarsen trilithons, whose massive lintels remain improbably balanced atop upright pillars. The earliest phase consisted of a circular ditch and bank enclosing an open interior, punctuated by a ring of pits now known as the Aubrey holes. Their original function remains debated, though they are often associated with early cremation burials. Regardless of their purpose, their presence establishes Stonehenge from its inception as a place of intentional gathering, demarcation, and repeated return. This was not a casual landmark, but a site embedded early within social and ritual practice. Over subsequent centuries, stone was introduced from remarkable distances. The smaller blue stones, weighing several tons each, were transported from the Preseli Hills of western Wales, more than 200 kilometers away. The larger Sarsen stones were quarried from the Marlborough Downs, roughly 30 kilometers to the north. The effort required to extract, transport, shape, and erect these materials using Neolithic technology implies a level of organization, coordination, and shared motivation far greater than the monument's modest footprint suggests. The stones were not simply stacked or placed, they were carefully shaped using techniques more commonly associated with woodworking. Mortise and tenon joints secured lintels to uprights, while tongue and groove connections stabilized adjacent stones. These methods indicate a deliberate transfer of skills across materials, reflecting a sophisticated understanding of structure and load rather than improvisation. Stonehenge's alignment with the solstices, most notably the midsummer sunrise and the midwinter sunset, has long been recognized. While such alignments are not unique among prehistoric monuments, their precision here reinforces the idea that observation of celestial cycles played a central role in the site's significance. Yet Stonehenge did not exist in isolation. It formed the focal point of a much larger ritual landscape connected by avenues, barrows, cursus monuments, and settlements that structured movement across the plain.
Nearby sites, such as Durrington Walls, reveal evidence of large seasonal gatherings marked by feasting, construction, and communal activity. These patterns suggest a rhythm of social life in which Stonehenge functioned as one node within a wider ceremonial system rather than a solitary shrine. Human remains found in and around the monument, including early cremation burials, point toward funerary associations. Isotopic analysis further reveals that some individuals traveled from distant regions, underscoring Stonehenge's role as a place that drew people together across wide geographic boundaries.
no written records accompany the monument. Its builders left no explicit explanation of its purpose, leaving modern interpretation dependent on material evidence and comparative analysis. This absence of text does not imply an absence of knowledge. On the contrary, the planning evident in Stonehenge's geometry, alignments, and construction sequence reflects a deep understanding of landscape, time, and material behavior developed through long observation and communal transmission. What complicates interpretation is not how Stonehenge was built, but why such effort was sustained across so many generations. The monument's final form appears less like an experiment than a culmination. The techniques employed show refinement rather than trial and error, suggesting that the builders were drawing upon established traditions whose earlier expressions were either less durable or have since disappeared. Across Britain and Ireland, thousands of Neolithic and Bronze Age monuments attest to a widespread megalithic culture. Stonehenge stands apart not because it is unique, but because of the precision with which architectural, astronomical, and social elements were integrated. This distinction has encouraged speculation about lost knowledge or external influence, yet the evidence points instead to continuity, local communities capable of extraordinary coordination, sustained by social structures stable enough to support projects spanning centuries. The deeper mystery lies in the monument's eventual abandonment. After its final major rearrangements, Stonehenge fell into disuse. The stones remained standing, but the practices that gave them meaning faded. Later populations encountered the site as an inheritance rather than a living tradition, assigning new interpretations while lacking the context that once made the monument necessary. Medieval legends and early modern theories filled this silence with stories of giants and druids, not because Stonehenge demanded fantasy, but because its original logic had become inaccessible. The idea of a lost civilization here does not refer to a vanished people unknown to archaeology, but to the disappearance of an integrated worldview in which monument, landscape, and community formed a single system. Stonehenge was not the product of a singular moment of brilliance, but of sustained cultural commitment. When that commitment dissolved, the knowledge embedded in stone remained mute. The solstitial alignments still function, sunrise over the heel stone in summer, sunset along the axis in winter, independent of belief or ceremony. The structure continues to perform even without an audience fully attuned to its purpose. Stonehenge does not point toward a forgotten empire or advanced technology. Instead, it gestures toward something more elusive, a mode of social organization capable of investing immense collective effort into shared symbolic projects without leaving behind narratives to explain them. In that silence, the monument occupies a space between comprehension and uncertainty, firmly rooted in prehistoric Britain, yet suggestive of deeper continuities now thinned beyond recognition. It stands as a reminder that civilizations do not vanish only through collapse or conquest, but through the gradual erosion of meaning, leaving behind stones that still mark time, even as the reasons for doing so quietly slip out of reach.
To understand the true character of the Giza Plateau, one must look beyond the overwhelming scale of the Great Pyramid and examine the stonework beneath the surface. Spread across the basalt and granite pavements of the plateau are physical traces that raise persistent questions, marks not easily explained by simplified versions of ancient technology. These remnants are not statues or ceremonial objects, but the byproducts of stoneworking itself. Drill holes, saw cuts, and unfinished surfaces appear in rose granite, one of the hardest naturally occurring building stones. When examined closely, many of these features display patterns that resemble controlled mechanical processes rather than irregular hand labor. When the mythology is set aside and the material evidence is analyzed through physics and engineering, Giza begins to resemble not merely a funerary complex, but a highly organized construction zone. Among the most debated features are cylindrical drill holes containing spiral markings along their inner walls. In modern engineering, such helical grooves are produced when a rotating drill advances into material under consistent downward pressure. The spacing of these spirals, known as the feed rate, indicates how far the tool penetrates with each rotation. In the late 19th century, the pioneering Egyptologist Sir Flinders Petrie carefully measured several granite cores recovered from Giza. Petrie did not claim the use of advanced machines, but he did note that the regularity and depth of the spiral grooves suggested a cutting action far more efficient than simple abrasion. He concluded that the tools involved must have applied sustained pressure while maintaining rotational stability, conditions difficult to achieve with soft metals alone. Importantly, Petrie did not argue that ancient Egyptians possessed modern power tools. However, his observations highlighted a genuine mechanical problem that remains unresolved. Copper tubing combined with loose sand abrasives, while capable of cutting granite, typically produces shallow, irregular grinding marks, not deep, continuous spirals. Experimental archaeology has shown that copper and sand techniques can shape stone, but only at very slow rates. The resulting surfaces tend to be smoothed by abrasion rather than sharply incised. The markings at Giza, by contrast, suggest controlled penetration rather than diffuse grinding. This discrepancy has fueled decades of debate not about impossibility, but about efficiency. The scale of the stoneworking further complicates the picture. The Giza Plateau contains not a handful, but hundreds of drilled features and immense lengths of sawed granite surfaces. Basalt paving stones near the Great Pyramid preserve long, straight cuts, some with overrun marks where a saw passed slightly beyond its intended stop. These cuts imply the use of large, rigid cutting systems capable of maintaining straight trajectories across extremely hard material. Microscopic analysis of some saw marks reveal parallel striations of uniform depth, patterns consistent with a stabilized cutting edge rather than a flexible handheld tool. A manually operated copper saw, pulled back and forth by workers, would naturally introduce variations in depth and angle. The consistency seen at Giza suggests a high degree of control, even if achieved through non-mechanical means, such as fixed frames and repeated passes. Another challenge often raised concerns resource consumption. Copper tools wear down rapidly when used against granite. Experimental reconstructions show that significant amounts of copper are lost during cutting, raising questions about the volume of metal required for projects of Giza's magnitude. While Egypt did possess copper sources and trade networks, the logistical demands remain a topic of legitimate academic discussion.
What is notably absent, however, is any archaeological evidence for large-scale copper waste deposits in the quantities some models would predict. This absence does not disprove traditional methods, but it does suggest that tool efficiency may have been higher than commonly assumed, possibly through the use of harder abrasive inclusions such as emery or corundum, both known in antiquity. Inside the Great Pyramid itself, the granite coffer in the King's Chamber displays tool marks consistent with the same cutting techniques seen elsewhere on the plateau. Overlapping drill paths, sharp internal corners, and flat interior surfaces all indicate careful planning and execution. The work appears methodical rather than experimental, suggesting that the builders were confident in their techniques. Rather than hiding these marks, the builders left them visible, implying that such precision was routine. This challenges the perception of Old Kingdom construction as purely brute force labor, and instead points toward a sophisticated craft tradition grounded in empirical knowledge of stone behavior. For decades, the absence of iron or steel tools has been used to frame Egyptian technology as fundamentally limited. Yet technological progress is not always linear, nor does it follow modern material hierarchies.
Just as contemporary engineering employs lasers, water jets, and chemical cutting methods that leave no blades behind, ancient solutions may have relied on principles we no longer prioritize. Some researchers have proposed the use of vibration-assisted drilling, fixed abrasive tools, or advanced compound abrasives. These ideas remain hypothetical, but they are attempts to reconcile the observable evidence with known physical constraints, rather than dismissing the marks as impossible. Petrie himself suggested that exceptionally hard stones embedded into cutting edges could explain some of the results. Still, hardness alone does not solve the problem of pressure and consistency. Efficient cutting requires not just sharpness, but controlled force delivered steadily over time. The common label of Stone Age technology becomes misleading in this context. The stonework of Giza reflects not primitiveness, but optimization, an engineering tradition refined through generations of experimentation. It suggests that technological peaks can arise, stabilize, and eventually decline. Later Egyptian periods never replicated the same scale or precision of granite cutting seen at Giza. By the New Kingdom, monumental construction favored different materials and techniques, and the methods used by the Old Kingdom builders were no longer fully employed. The Giza Plateau, thus, stands as a record not only of ambition, but of lost specialization. Its stones preserve the fingerprints of a construction culture that mastered hard materials with remarkable efficiency. Whatever tools were used, simple or complex, the result was a level of precision that continues to challenge modern assumptions about the limits of ancient engineering.
Roughly 600 miles south of the Great Pyramid of Giza, buried beneath the shifting sands of the Nubian Desert in southern Egypt, lies a prehistoric site that dramatically predates the age of the pharaohs. Known today as Nabta Playa, this remote basin appears lifeless and hostile. Summer temperatures regularly soar beyond 120 degrees Fahrenheit, and the landscape is defined by cracked earth, scorched stone, and relentless wind. In the present day, it ranks among the driest environments on the planet. Yet this desolation is deceptive. Between 9000 and 5000 BCE, during the African humid period, Nabta Playa was a seasonal savanna dotted with shallow lakes, grasses, and migrating herds of wild and domesticated cattle. It was within this environment that prehistoric communities undertook an act that fundamentally challenges traditional narratives of early human capability. Sometime around 6000 to 5500 BCE, long before dynastic Egypt emerged, these people constructed one of the earliest known megalithic ceremonial and astronomical sites in the world. The significance of Nabta Playa lies not only in its age, but in the enormous chronological gap it creates. When these stones were being erected, the Egyptian Old Kingdom was still thousands of years in the future. At the heart of the site is a modest stone circle, measuring roughly 12 feet in diameter. At first glance, it appears simple, almost unimpressive. But this apparent simplicity masks a deeper complexity. The stones were not placed randomly, nor were they erected merely as boundary markers or casual ritual objects. Several alignments correspond closely with solar events, particularly the summer solstice, which would have marked the arrival of monsoon rains critical for survival. While some early interpretations proposed that Nabta Playa tracked the precession of the equinoxes, modern archaeology approaches this claim with caution. Precession is an extremely slow astronomical phenomenon caused by the gradual wobble of Earth's axis, completing a full cycle roughly every 25,700 years. Demonstrating intentional tracking of this motion requires long-term, high-precision records that cannot be conclusively proven at the site. However, what can be stated with confidence is that the builders possessed a sophisticated understanding of celestial cycles, cardinal directions, and the relationship between the sky and seasonal change.
Alignments within the stone circle and associated megalithic rows indicate careful observation of the sun, stars such as Sirius, and possibly prominent constellations visible during the wet season. The discovery of Nabta Playa in the 1970s was largely accidental. Archaeologist Fred Wendorf and his team noticed several standing stones protruding from the desert floor. Subsequent excavations revealed a complex ceremonial landscape beneath the sand, including stone alignments, buried megaliths, tumuli, and cattle burial sites, evidence of a ritual center rather than a temporary campsite. Mainstream archaeology identifies the builders as semi-nomadic pastoralists, groups who migrated into the Sahara during its green phase and relied heavily on cattle herding. Their survival depended on accurately predicting the seasonal rains that filled the Playa Basin. Yet this description alone fails to account for the engineering and planning evident at the site. Constructing the stone circle and the longer alignments required transporting multi-ton sandstone blocks from distant outcrops. Even more importantly, the builders needed reliable methods for identifying true north and cardinal directions without compasses, metal tools, or written language. Some stones were intentionally shaped, while others were erected only to be buried deliberately in deep pits, a behavior that parallels ritual practices seen at Göbekli Tepe in Anatolia, an even older ceremonial complex. This places Nabta Playa in a crucial position within human history. Chronologically, it sits between the monumental stone traditions of 10,000 BCE Anatolia and the rise of dynastic Egypt around 3000 BCE. For decades, scholars struggled to explain how Egyptian civilization appeared with advanced knowledge of astronomy, geometry, and monumental stone construction seemingly fully formed.
Nabta Playa offers a compelling piece of that puzzle. It suggests that many foundational ideas, solar symbolism, cardinal alignment, ritual landscapes, and the sacred association between cattle and the heavens developed among desert populations long before the Nile kingdoms arose. As the Sahara gradually dried after 5000 BCE, these groups were forced to migrate toward more stable water sources, particularly the Nile Valley, carrying their knowledge with them. The pharaohs did not invent Egyptian cosmology in isolation. They inherited and systematized ideas that had already been refined for millennia by prehistoric observers of the sky. From an engineering standpoint, the site is equally unsettling. Achieving consistent astronomical alignment requires standardized measurement, repeated observation, and intergenerational knowledge transfer. If the builders were constantly on the move, how was this continuity maintained? The evidence suggests that Nabta Playa was revisited repeatedly over centuries, functioning as a fixed ceremonial anchor within a broader migratory landscape. This implies a level of social organization and cultural memory far beyond what is typically attributed to Neolithic pastoralists. It points toward a green Sahara culture, complex, knowledgeable, and largely erased by climate change rather than conquest. The mathematical implications alone challenge traditional timelines. Recognizing long-term celestial patterns requires patience, record-keeping, oral or symbolic, and a worldview oriented toward deep time. Nabta Playa demonstrates that abstract thought, spatial planning, and astronomical awareness existed long before cities, writing, or metallurgy. Archaeological excavations beneath several megaliths revealed ritual cattle burials, while others concealed carefully shaped stones with no apparent utilitarian purpose. These were not accidental deposits. They reflect deliberate symbolic acts, treating the ground itself as part of a cosmological map. Computer simulations have shown that around 6000 BCE, certain stone alignments correspond closely with prominent stars and solar positions visible at that time. While claims of exact stellar mapping remain debated, there is no question that the site functioned as a ritualized timekeeping system deeply tied to celestial observation.
If Nabta Playa was constructed and modified in phases, as evidence suggests, then multiple generations returned to the same location over centuries to refine, maintain, and reinterpret its meaning. This level of cultural stability is usually reserved for later complex societies, not prehistoric pastoralists. Environmental pressure likely intensified this focus. As rainfall became less predictable and the lakes began to vanish, observing the sky may have been a way to seek order in a destabilizing world. Understanding long-term cycles could have offered meaning or hope in the face of inevitable displacement. Today, Nabta Playa stands as one of the most important archaeological sites on Earth, not because of its size, but because of its implications. It bridges the vast gap between Ice Age ritual landscapes and the dawn of recorded history, reminding us that humanity's intellectual awakening began far earlier and far deeper in the desert than we are often taught to believe.